As we head into week 13, lucky week 13 of the NFL season, you got to start to ask yourself, who are the guys you could trust down the home stretch? That's where the SPAGS rankings come in. Of course, we grade out the players based upon their opportunity, based upon their efficiency, and all the special things that go into that. Of course, we're going to go position by position today, and let's start it off bright and early here with the wide receivers. And of course, Keenan Allen's on the thumbnail. You can tell that he's going to be an important part of this one. But I do think it's almost more impressive what Tyreek Hill is doing right now, where Tyreek Hill, one of the few players this week that actually went up in terms of their SPAGS score. You can see right next to the players' names. Tyreek now into 30.5, was just above the 30 last week. As we talked about, this is the guy with one of the most efficient roles, one of the best roles in football, 0.39 EPA per target for him. Of course, the expected points added metric that tells you how much above average a player is contributing towards a team scoring points. That's where Tyreek has excelled on the year. The issue that I'm seeing with Tyreek, he just doesn't play enough snaps. And you can see down below, Keenan Allen, 60 snaps a game. Tyreek, 44 snaps a game. So obviously Tyreek has been banged up a little bit. That might knock his snap count down by 1 or 2, maybe 3 to 4 these last couple of weeks where he's had the hand injury. He had, I think, a leg injury in one of the games recently as well. But Tyreek's role is so good. 2 deep shots per game, 1.5 which are catchable balls. If there was a catchable ball going his way as well, he is catching it. 1.4 catches per game on throws to 20-plus air yards. He's got a 1.6 EPA on throws to 20-plus air yards as well. So Tyreek is the guy that he's going to be $9,600 on DraftKings this week. Obviously, we know the best ball side of things. But for DraftKings, even like I could pay $9,600 for him. He's not the Cooper Kupp of a couple of years ago where he's going to get you 15 targets, 100 yards, pretty much like clockwork. But he have the potential to put up 40 once again this week, especially against the Commanders D that we know gives up big days to Saquon Barkley, who isn't good. They can give up big days to anybody who is good, absolutely. So for Tyreek Hill, he is a player that no matter what the matchup is, there's going to be some ugly ones down the home stretch, I believe, for him. But there's still a spot for him where he's going to have the upside every week. I think you're willing to go there, and you have to be willing to go there because of what the role is represented. Shout out Justin in the chat. Appreciate all you guys being here. The SPAGS rankings are the video where this is a labor of love. This is what the process looks like. And frankly, I think I should be doing a better job to promote what they're for, where, last week, Kyron Williams comes back in, puts up over 30 fantasy points, or puts up over 40, actually. He was a player that's been top 5 in the SPAGS rankings pretty much all year, and I mentioned him coming back to the last video we did before Thanksgiving. So that's where you should kind of view the SPAGS rankings as, like, what are this guy's opportunity every single week? And then that means, can you play this guy even in matchups where it's not looking like the best one? For Kyron, that was one of the best matchups on football going against the Cardinals. But for any of these guys you see in the top 10, for the most part, I would say these are guys you should be willing to play in any matchup, any situation, as long as the price point aligns, as long as the projection aligns, or if they're just not highly owned in tournaments. So that's how I would look at that for DFS in particular. Number 2 on the wide receiver of the SPAGS rankings here is going to be Keenan Allen. Keenan Allen surging up as well. He is flat even now with Tyreek Hill in terms of the EPA per target, 0.39 EPA per target. But again, 60 snaps per game, 12.1 intended touches per game. So a little bit more than Tyreek. He's now getting more intended touches than any other wide receiver in football. As we talk about a lot as well, where Keenan Allen goes, we do see Justin Herbert go. So that does make for a little more logical pairing too. For Keenan Allen, I still think that there is potential for a floor at some point, just because of the fact that you have to, at a certain point, if you're a defense, take Keenan Allen away and force Justin Herbert to throw to Gerald Everett, to throw to Donald Parham, to throw to Eckler even, to throw to Quentin Johnston, like, to all these guys that are not Keenan Allen. But Keenan Allen still keeps getting open, still gets moved around the formation enough where he's finding little pockets to get into time and time again. So for Keenan Allen, like, I think he is a player you should be trusting on the home stretch. He is $9K this week on DraftKings, so that price tag is coming up as well. Definitely going to be a live pivot to a guy like Tyreek this week. But I would say, for me, I'd personally prefer to have Tyreek. We're talking about these very lofty salaries, but it's hard to ignore Keenan Allen's role. And I do think if he's going to be low owned somehow in terms of tournaments, like, I would be willing to play Keenan Allen because he has the biggest opportunity of any wide receiver in football right now. A little bit less on the air yards front, but in terms of the pure PPR points, like, he's getting there every week in terms of the opportunity. Number 3 here, a guy who is not going to help out your teams, unfortunately, not going to help out my teams. Here in the offseason of best ball, I thought, lucky me, I'm getting so many 101s. What influence I have here with Splash Play? And in reality, it turned out that the Justin Jefferson 101 was an absolute curse. So getting double the field on him on both DraftKings and Underdog did not help me out, even the slightest. Jefferson now on a bye, going to come back in next week. We have Josh Dobbs, his potential starting role, hanging in the balance. I do think Dobbs will start once again, just because you kind of have to see what Dobbs can do with the alpha receiver, I would think. But Nick Mullins, certainly a guy that can get the ball outside a little bit more based on what we've seen in the past. So that's going to be a risk point. But that said, Justin Jefferson, despite all this time off, has held on to his role. And we've seen guys move up. We've seen guys move down. But Justin Jefferson's role does remain a top 3 role overall. So When he comes back in next week, I would say he's probably worth playing, even though it is a different situation. There's no Kirk Cousins. As we talked about, backup QBs, guys like Josh Dobbs, they just don't have the juice to get the ball outside to a guy like Justin Jefferson as well as a starter does, a Kirk Cousins who's a big arm guy for whatever critiques you want to give of him. So I'd say for Jefferson, definitely going to be some risk moving forward, coming off the injury and all of that. But I do think that he has a top 3 role in football, and I think it's really been cemented by the fact that a lot of the guys who were looking good and maybe better than him earlier in the year have started to come back down. And Jefferson certainly can come back down as well because of those variables. But I do think he is a player that tournament-wise, if he comes in for week 14 and he's 7,800 or something, and Tyreek is 95 or 10K, and Keenan Allen's 80, 89 or whatever. Like, if all those other guys are cheaper, I would play Jefferson and just take your shots. But I do think that is obviously going to be, he can't save you, I don't think, in best ball, unfortunately. Can't save me, especially. Thank you for all the high-end intel. I get getting better every week, says Sammy. I appreciate that, Sammy. Of course, appreciate all you guys being here and being part of this process here on Splash Play. And one quick note as well, tomorrow and Friday, I'll be doing the Stochastic NFL Strategy Show at 11 a.m. So Splash Play, both tomorrow and Friday, will be going off at 12 o'clock again. So set your clocks accordingly. And hopefully next week we'll be back to a rhythm of Monday to Friday at 11 a.m. But had to fill in for Lofty. Had to fill in for a fellow dad who's dumb enough to go and have a second child. So that is why the schedule's been a little bit weird this week on Splash Play. CeeDee Lamb at number 4. CeeDee Lamb, the most efficient wide receiver in football, at least relative to high volume guys. 0.52 EPA per target for him. Only 10.1 targets per game we've seen recently, including on that Thanksgiving slate. And CeeDee Lamb's still putting up good games, still putting up a 17, 18 fantasy point day. But it can break you in a DFS tournament because Dak Prescott is still throwing to enough guys, still propping up Brandon Cooks, still propping up Michael Gallup, still propping up Jalen Tolbert, still propping up Jake Ferguson. There's so many guys you can go to, and I think that's the biggest pain point for a guy like CeeDee Lamb. But CeeDee Lamb has done everything you can ask of him. Like, he's been one of the best players in football. I guess the one critique you give him is that his air yardage is a little bit lower than some of the other guys, 105 air yards per game compared to 123 for Jefferson, 115 for Keenan Allen, 110 for Tyreek, which honestly you would think would be a little bit higher. But I think for CeeDee Lamb, he's just been great all year. It's hard to ignore it. I do think his tide's been rising with Dax, but he's going to be the best receiver in that pecking order. I just think the concern is overall that, again, if you're a defense, much like with Keenan Allen, who do you sell to stop? You sell to stop CeeDee Lamb. And you're willing to let Brandon Cooks go for 100 yards, willing to let Jalen Tolbert, Michael Gallup, whoever else that they want to rotate in. You're willing to get Kevontae Turpin get some long touchdowns if you stop CeeDee Lamb. So I do think that's the one thing he's going to run into a little bit down the home stretch. And I guess the other part of it too would be that they're really not playing for anything too serious. Like, they can't win the NFC East. It would be very difficult to do that. I think they're still playing as though they can. But that's the other point of it. At a certain point in the playoffs, you might see the Cowboys pull back a little bit just because what do they have to gain if they can't win the East and they're pretty much locked into a playoff spot. But I think that they are very much it's a good situation overall for CeeDee Lamb. I'm not going to begrudge him in anything, but I do think there are some concerns I would have for him moving forward that I might not have for some of the alpha target earners who we know that team's been scheming to stop them all year. For CeeDee Lamb, I do think it's been like, hey, last month we really got to pay attention to CeeDee Lamb. I think we kind of saw that a little bit in that Commanders game. We got Amon-Ra St. Brown coming up next. Amon-Ra, the big concern for him, and I guess the positive is that he's been under 7 air yards per target all year. He's now up to 7.6 air yards per target. But I think Jahmyr Gibbs being in and getting those low ADOT targets is kind of hurting the overall volume of Amon-Ra, where Amon-Ra is still at 11.2 opportunities a game. So, like, he's getting a lot of work. But I think it could be a little bit higher if we didn't have Gibbs taking 4, 5, 6 away in the game now and getting so many snaps as well, where he's getting looks at the very least. And I think that's something for Amon-Ra, where over the last few years, he's just been a guy where he's the first read, he's the second read, he's the third read for everything this Lions offense does. And I think right now there's a little bit of concern that he's just not getting the same looks. The hope would be, though, that he becomes more of like a CeeDee Lamb, where he then gets a little bit deeper downfield, gets a little more opportunities, a little more shots to win outside one-on-one. But we haven't really seen that yet. So that's where Amon-Ra, I think, still a perfectly fine play. He's at number 5 for a reason here. But I do think for his spot, like, it could be better. And I think he kind of deserves better. But that's sort of the main ways I view that. A.J. Brown falling a little bit here. A.J. Brown still 0.44 EPA per target on the year, 9.5 intended touches per game. So the intended touches coming down is definitely going to hurt him a little bit. But I would say for A.J. Brown, the biggest concern is just that Devontae Smith being more involved. I think it's kind of reminding the Eagles of like, oh yeah, Devontae Smith also deserves a pretty good workload. And that's become largely because of the fact that Dallas Goedert isn't in these last few weeks. Dallas Goedert not likely to play again this week. We will see. I think the expectation is he comes back the week after that, which again, another situation that probably won't help you out very much. But that game should be interesting one. I believe it's week 14 against the Cowboys. But in this spot though, I think for A.J. Brown, like we know the upside is there. We know he's a strong player. We know he can get there outside. but it's now a couple games in a row where we've seen Devontae Smith rise. We've seen A.J. Brown come down. I think we're kind of back to what we thought it would be heading into the year, that it definitely was last year, where it was a 1A with A.J. Brown, a 1B with Devontae Smith, and both guys had the opportunity to get there. For this year to start it off, after A.J. Brown complained so vocally, did his little crybaby fit on the sidelines of Jalen Hurts, he got targeted so heavily that he then became the number one, and Devontae Smith became the number two. And it might not sound like that's a big difference, but treating two top targets agnostically versus force-feeding one and treating another one who's really good, like a clear-cut number two, it just is such a different role. And it sucks for A.J. Brown people, because I know he was helping me advance a lot of teams. I'm sure for some of you guys out there, I think the same thing. But I would say for his role, the spike weeks can be there. Absolutely. The opportunity is big enough. But I think in terms of the floor, we are seeing that come down meaningfully. We're seeing him under 10 fantasy points enough times now that I think for his spot, he's a little bit more fluid than some of these other guys, where there just isn't anybody the tier of a Devontae Smith coming. Like Keenan Allen's got, he's got Quentin Johnson coming for him. He's got Josh Palmer off of IR. He's got Jalen Guyton. These guys aren't competing for targets. Jalen Waddle for Tyreek, a better case. But I think that's still, the same thing, where Tyreek is now a number one. Waddle's a number two. It's not 1A, 1B there. And I think for Philadelphia, that's the biggest thing for A.J. Brown. It's hurting him. It's just, he's not the number one. Jamar Chase coming down pretty heavily. Jamar Chase, I think this ranking is due to a lot of what he's done in the past with Joe Burrow, obviously. For Jamar Chase, the biggest concern is really just that Browning can't get in the ball. Again, backup QBs can't get the ball outside. That's why they're backup QBs. They don't have the ability to get the ball downfield, to have the arm strength, to have the ability to read and process and get the ball to the boundary receivers. So Jamar Chase can get moved around to formation, especially because T. Higgins, it looks like, not going to play again. Higgins might not play again this year because it is a contract year for him. That would not be the most shocking thing in the world. That you would think they would have put him on IR, but I think they're hoping he comes back in, and I don't think he's going to push himself to come back in. But the situation with Browning is just not good. Browning is not an accurate QB. He's not a good QB. Definitely some ways to get the ball to Jamar Chase, even with a bad QB. I mean, we've seen it with Tommy DeVito, able to get the ball to Jalen Hyatt. That said, I don't know the Bengals want to play that way. I don't know they're going to. And I have the concern as well that the Bengals at a certain point, I don't think they're even playing for the playoffs at this point. And if that's the case, is Jamar Chase going to go out there in a meaningless Week 17 game? I would say probably not. So that's certainly something there where if he goes and Browning can kind of get his footing, it's going to look better for Chase. But I really do expect he can fall out here. Can he fall in the top 10? Probably not, because I do expect Puka to keep coming down. Do expect Thielen to keep coming down. But I think for Jamar Chase, he's holding on to this top 10 spot because of what he's done and not because of what he's going to do moving forward, even though, again, opportunities here. Shout out to Sammy. Appreciate the kind words. Love the small classroom over here. Let me shut the fuck up and listen. I appreciate it here. Look, ultimately, these are just takes, and it's database takes, obviously, where the SPAGS rankings, if you're not familiar, haven't followed it all year, I roll up a bunch of EPA metrics as well as volume metrics into one to try to find the best combination of all the above, because the SPAGS part of it, obviously, it's my last name, but superior players, great spots. That's what fantasy football is. You want to find great players in great spots, or some combination therein, where some guys like a Saquon Barkley, not a superior player in terms of how I'd grade him out, but does end up in a great spot because he gets over 20 carries a game. Josh Jacobs, a better example right now. So that's how this goes. And I hope it adds value, because again, I really feel like if I personally had just subscribed to the rankings and been like, fuck it, Kyren Williams is back in, play him no matter what, because he's a top 5 back, things are going to work out better for you. So that's how the volume and efficiency stuff does tend to work out. Puka Nacua coming in towards the bottom here at number 8. A little bit surprised to see this one, but he is still efficient at 0.28 EPA per target, 10.3 targets per game. The red zone work has always been iffy for him. He's getting 0.8 red zone targets, 0.2 red zone rushes. There's not a lot of workload there. Also not getting deep targets near these guys, but he's just so efficient in everything. When he does get a deep target, which is only 0.7 times per game, he's got a 1.1 EPA on those plays, which is better than everybody besides Tyreek Hill, who we talked about so far. So Puka's good. It's just that Cooper Kupp is out there. Cooper Kupp doesn't want to leave the field. Cooper Kupp doesn't want to, I don't know why. It's just like Cooper Kupp, I think, is kind of brain broken for being so hurt over the last year and change that he just keeps forcing himself out there. He's not the same Cooper Kupp, but he's still taking some volume away, taking some opportunity away. And then we also have guys like Kyren, of course, in the mix, who are certainly players that can take targets away from a guy like Puka, who does benefit from the short range stuff. So I think that's what the two things that Puka are running into. I think we see Kupp go out at some point, which really he should, even though the Rams won last week. I don't think they've actually done anything to help their playoff odds. So there's hope for Puka down the home stretch. And I would say, again, if you see Kupp out, I would jam Puka in. For what it is right now, you could still play Puka, but it's definitely not feeling like the best thing overall. Agrees that Thielen is still in the top 10. I agree. I think that I keep hoping Thielen's going to fall out. but he's been efficient. Like, it's really just that the workload overall started to come down where, I'll skip over to Thielen real fast because Diggs, frankly, not the most exciting guy to talk about. But Thielen, 0.4 EPA per target, 9.2 targets per game. Again, doesn't get deep shots, does get a little bit more red zone work than Puka, but 0.4 deep shots per game, 1.1 red zone targets per game. So the role for Thielen is still pretty good. I do think, though, with Thomas Brown now taking over fully and Frank Reich finally being fired, I think even though he's only been on the team for 12 games, I still think that he needed to be fired and probably shouldn't have been hired in the first place and made awful moves in terms of what they brought in terms of free agency, including Adam Thielen. For Thielen, though, I think he's running into two things. Number one, I don't think Thomas Brown is going to use him as effectively as, well, not even as effectively, as high volume as we have seen Frank Reich use Adam Thielen in the past. Number two, Adam Thielen's old. So it's like I think we're kind of running into both parts of that for Adam Thielen, where start of the year is so hot. Now I think he could still give you a spike week, but the role is there. It's just a matter of like, how much does Thomas Brown keep that role as it is? And frankly, if it were me, once again, and I'm not a head coach, despite, again, the money hat here, all the credibility I need, Terrace Marshall, bring in fucking Terrace Marshall. You're a coach here. You're Chris Tabor. You're a special teams guy. Bring in your young gun who actually has some upside and see what can happen there. That's what I would try to push towards rather than going to Adam Thielen, who we know what he can do. We know what DJ Chark and what he is, and frankly, he's been even worse than he was in Detroit last year, where Detroit was actually pretty efficient downfield. This year, he's added no value to that Carolina offense. Partially his fault, but also in part because Bryce Young just doesn't get the ball downfield. But for me, if I'm a new coach, I think there could be some stuff that move around, and I personally be curious to see what Terrace Marshall, what Laviska Shenault, what Jonathan Mingo can do. Mingo certainly had a bigger game last week than he's had all year, but it wasn't enough to get there. I think you kind of need to get Thielen out and just see what you can do, especially Carolina's tanking right now, but not deliberately because they don't have their first-round pick. I'll hold Thielen to see what the new coach does. I think you should hold him, unless you could trade him for something meaningful at this point, which I presume you can't with how close the playoffs are. But for Thielen, it's just like, I wouldn't get rid of him. I definitely wouldn't cut him. But in terms of playing him week to week, I'd be careful about who you're playing him over for season-long stuff. Is how I feel about that. Close out the top 10, Stefon Diggs. Diggs, to me, is just not the same guy as last year. And I know we could talk about the off-field stuff. Him clearly venting a lot in some of the press conferences, clearly being frustrated in the sidelines in some games. His brother going on social media saying that he shouldn't be a Buffalo Bill anymore. But the thing that jumps out to me, Stefon Diggs last year was one of the most efficient receivers in football. Had, I believe, a 0.35 EPA while getting 8 to 10 targets a game. I forget offhand what the exact number is. This year he's at, he's out 10 targets a game and a 0.17 EPA. So that's kind of pushing more towards pure volume rather than actual efficiency. And that would be the lowest amongst anybody in this top 10. That'd be lower than Adam Thielen. That'd be lower than Mike Evans. That'd be lower than Nico Collins. That'd be lower than Brandon Ayuk. It'd be lower than DJ Moore. Higher than Devontae Adams. So he's got that going for him. But that's just kind of where he is now. He's more of a Devontae Adams, more of a Michael Pittman even than he is this outlier first-round receiver. So for Stefon Diggs, I'm hoping that we could see him rise a little bit more with Josh Allen clearly getting more control of the offense. We did see a big week for him, even though it didn't go to Diggs entirely in that last time against the Eagles. But I'm hoping that Diggs has a few bounce-back games down the home stretch here. I could really use 2 big games from him in week 13 and 14. But I would say with Diggs, that is certainly the risk point. It's just that it's not as efficient. And, how much can we blame Ken Dorsey for it? I'm not sure. I kind of think it's a little bit more on Diggs personally. For entertainment purposes only, fuck Diggs. Love the Bills, but that kid cries like a bitch every fucking game. All right, well, Sammy's got to take. Sammy is our Buffalo man on the street, so I get that. I think just Diggs deserves to get force-fed the ball more. I think that's the biggest issue I have is that they're trying to get cute. They're feeding Khalil Shakir. I like Dalton Kincaid. I think he's a good target. But really, Diggs is your alpha guy. Diggs is your A.J. Brown. Diggs is your Tyreek. So they should be doing more to use him like that, and they're just not. The only time they've used him like that was against the Dolphins, and I had one of their best results of the year against the Dolphins. So I tend to think it's not fully Diggs' fault, but I do think when you run into both parts where a less motivated player, a team that's not using the player to the same peak capacities that they have in the past, that just kind of hurts everybody, and that's how it's going for Stefon Diggs. Guys outside the top 10, Mike Evans, Nico Collins, Brandon Ayuk. Brandon Ayuk still the most efficient receiver in football, 0.65 EPA per target, but 6.5 targets a game is not going to do it for you. DJ Moore, Devontae Adams, that closes out the group. And right behind Adams is Michael Pittman and whatever. Chris Olave, Noah Brown, DK Metcalf. I will drop the full SPAGS rankings and the pinned comment down below after the video. So check that out there if you want to see more details about the guys that you like. But that's wide receiver for right now. Let's pull it out. Let's go to another one. Oh, right. I forgot the Bills were on the bye this week. Fuck. Well, my Diggs shares are really in trouble. I do think if you sneak Diggs into the playoffs, it's going to look pretty good. But, man, sneaking Diggs into the playoffs is going to be pretty tough because he's not giving you enough of a ceiling. So that's pretty tough. But I completely forgot about that one. Fuck, man. The Bills shares are not going to be in a good state. Your Josh Allen shares are going to look good. Your Diggs shares are going to look pretty tough. All right, let's go to the next screen here. Who should I do next? Let's do running backs. I think running backs is more interesting than some of the other positions that we're going to talk about here. QB didn't really move around that much. A few guys, Baker Mayfield finally getting close to falling out of the top 10. We'll hit on that in a moment here. And guys, if you're watching live or after the fact, please smash the like button here. Splash Play is now dangerously close to 3K subs. We're about 40 away. So your support means more now than ever. It obviously always matters a lot here. But you guys have been really coming through, hitting the like button, helping us get seen by more people. As more likes we get, the more we get suggested to new folks. And that's just how the YouTube algorithm game goes. So please help a brother out, smash the like button. And if for some reason you're not subscribed as well, please do that down below. As you can tell, this neon flashing GIF. Who could ignore a neon flashing GIF? Hopefully not you. All right, running backs, Christian McCaffrey. Again, for whatever I want to shit on the idea of early round running backs and what McCaffrey, and I still think Tyreek's going to advance more and give you a little more upside. For Christian McCaffrey, though, like, he's been great. He's been great. 0.15 EPA per pass, a flat 0 EPA per rush. But given the fact that he is running it so many times a game, 17.5 rushes per game, you give him some grace on that. The thing that stands out, though, is going to be those 5.8 opportunities in the red zone per game. That is so much for this guy. And it's also 2.8 inside the 10-yard line per game. So we are now seeing such an incredible crush of volume, the most volume in football for this guy in an efficient offense for a player that just has a nose for the end zone, as we saw with his touchdown streak. For Christian McCaffrey, he's number one. Nobody can knock him off, I think, unless Kyren Williams can really luck box in big games. But I think for Kyren Williams, like, he's a great player relative to his opportunity and all that. But Christian McCaffrey is a tier above. And again, he still avoids tackles better than a lot of the guys we talk about. An 18% avoided tackle rate on run plays, 50% avoided tackle rate on pass plays. Like, he still has juice, where a lot of these volume backs, a lot of these 20-touch backs don't have that juice. Josh Jacobs, a guy we've talked about, where his avoided tackle rate is half of what it was last year. And that's normally what happens. So for Christian McCaffrey to be this efficient, I think is a real big credit for him. So our guy, Big Lenny, could feel pretty good about that, but it's pretty tough. NFL having buys on week 13 is beyond stupid. Yeah, week 13 and week 14 buys are coming up for some folks. So maybe something to be more mindful of, I think, especially depending on the type of teams you build in best ball for next year. But I tend to not sweat bye weeks too much. But like, if I were relying on the Cardinals, who I think are on a bye week 14, there's another one I know it's on a bye week 14. I would really be sweating that, because, like, yeah, if you're on the fence, like, not having two teams potentially in your roster could be really tough to advance. So it doesn't matter too much if your team's really crushing, but it does matter, obviously, in the micro that we're going to see over the next few weeks. Kyren Williams at number 2. So Kyren Williams, kind of the flip side of Christian McCaffrey, where more efficient as a runner, 0.16 EPA per rush, less efficient as a catcher, negative 0.07 EPA per target. But the workload is so great. He's getting 5.4 red zone touches a game, 2.4 inside the 10-yard line per game. That's fundamentally what DFS success at running back comes down to. Are you getting goal line work? Are you getting red zone work? These guys are both getting them, and they're getting them in the pass game and in the run game. So I think that's why, for me, these guys are a tier above. There's also, for Kyren Williams, like, there's obviously other weapons they can go to, but in the short range, they do seem to favor Kyren over guys like Puka, where Puka, again, not getting red zone work. Cooper Kupp not getting a ton of red zone work. But we are seeing Kyren get a lot of red zone work time and time again. So I think that is something that should be tough for him to get where he needs to go. In some spots, for Puka, rather, that is, to get where he needs to go. But Kyren is such a linchpin of what they're doing. Going to be some tough matchups here. If Kyren goes off against the Browns, I think you're safe to play Kyren in any matchup and think that he has a shot to hit a ceiling. But this week against the Browns is going to be a pretty big litmus test for Kyren, because I do think he's more of a game script dependent version of CMC. But if he can prove that he's going to be great in any spot, then he might be one of the highest priced running backs and might actually be the league winner that it seems like he can be based on what he put up this past week. ETN should be top 5 easy. No, he shouldn't. I mean, he's not. He's tied for number 10 because he doesn't get enough red zone work. He's also not that shifty. 15% avoided tackle rate. Again, like, the data is the data, and I don't want to say, like, I'm not the biggest ATN guy, but the data is not a thing that I'm manipulating. I'm not changing things to try to, and hopefully my connection's holding up. For some reason, I'm getting the bad Wi-Fi signal, even though we're on a wired connection. So, like, ATN, I think, has kind of got lucky for a month stretch, and now we're seeing the flip side of that. And that's what we're trying to isolate here, is, like, efficiency plus volume is what leads you to have the great games every other week, as opposed to a stretch run of good games, and then it goes away. And I think we're seeing the downside of ATN right now, but he's not top 5. Like, he's just not. He's gotten the results that are top 5. He's not top 5 himself, is what I feel. There we go. Connection's good. Good to hear it. All right, let's keep it going here. And again, it's not a slight against ATN. I think he's done a great job, but, like, you got to kind of acknowledge these guys for what they are. And when we bring our personal biases in, that's where shit goes awry. So ATN, I think, is properly ranked, but you may disagree. Alvin Kamara is in at number 3. Kamara, again, not the most efficient guy, but the volume is great. A 0 flat EPA per rush, 0.08 EPA per target, but 22.5 opportunities per game looks pretty good. I would also say for Alvin Kamara, the thing that stands out is that we're going to see opportunity for him be a little bit higher. There's no Chris Olave potentially coming up, concussion protocol for him. Rashid Shaheed going to be out most likely with an injury as well. Michael Thomas is out, and basically, I don't think he got put on IR yet, unless I missed that. But he is like an IR level injury for him. So you're going to not see as many guys out there to take targets away from Kamara. So in his spot, I think there's still value in the role, 7.6 targets per game. The red zone work is not nearly as good as Kyron Williams or Christian McCaffrey or even David Montgomery. 2.9 red zone rushes per game, 0.9 red zone targets per game. I think it's really a situation for Kamara where I think he's going to benefit these next few weeks, but it also could just be Taysom Hill taking some touches away. You could see Juwan Johnson get more involved in the red zone like he was last year. So Kamara, I would say, comes with a little bit of risk, but in terms of a ceiling, kind of interesting play this week because I just don't think people will be on him enough, and there really should be some consolidation of targets where if he's going to get another 15-target game, this is probably it coming up. So just something to keep in mind. David Montgomery, 0.09 EPA per rush, 0.13 EPA per pass, been great in efficiency. The workload's coming down, though. He's now down to 18.3 intended touches per game. He's getting the red zone work, though, 4.8 red zone rushes, 2.8 of which are inside the 10-yard line. So that's all really high efficiency, high upside work for David Montgomery. But Gibbs is now taking enough off the table here where Montgomery, we've seen him come down a little bit. He was, I think, number 3 last week or number 2. Now he's down to number 4. That's where I think Montgomery's going to go. I would expect him to fall behind Josh Jacobs, to fall behind Tony Pollard, maybe to fall behind Eckler, but probably not given how Eckler has played. But I think for David Montgomery still, like if the price tag comes down at all because of the workload going Gibbs' way, I'm happy to go to David Montgomery and feel comfortable with it. But for Montgomery, I think that he has been a very solid player who probably deserves to be in a backfield where he doesn't have to share it with a young upstart rookie who provides a completely different look. But I think for him, like he's definitely still got a role, and 3 touchdown games are there for him without, that workload in the red zone. Josh Jacobs at number 5. So Jacobs is the kind of running back that I hate, but you kind of have to acknowledge here, and that's what these rankings are for. Again, like I like efficient backs. I like guys that miss tackles. I like guys that do a lot of things that add value. It isn't just dependent on the O-line blocking for you or dependent upon there being a lot of volume going your way. Jacobs is a pure volume back. He's a negative 0.15 EPA per rush, negative 0.09 EPA per pass, but he's now up to 22.8 intended touches per game, which would be tied for first in the league right now, tied with McCaffrey and tied with Saquon Barkley for first in the league. So that's where Jacobs has the value. I certainly don't think, why is my shit updating Microsoft Outlook as though I need that while I'm in the middle of a stream. For Jacobs, again, low avoided tackle rate, a 13% avoided tackle rate. So he's basically was at 33% last year. He has fallen off a cliff. They were now at almost 1/3 of the avoided tackles that he had last year. But the red zone work is good. 3.2 red zone carries per game, 1.8 inside the 10-yard line per game, 0.6 red zone targets per game, 0.3 of which are inside the 10-yard line. So like he's a bell cow back in an offense that makes no sense. They kept running it last week when the Chiefs started to put distance. They just are going to do the thing that Antonio Pierce has said, which good for the coach speaking next, is that Antonio Pierce said that he's going to get 20 touches a game. He's getting 20 touches a game, but he's just not like good. So like if there's a game where the Raiders are playing another dog shit team, play Jacobs. If they're playing the Chiefs, I'm less inclined to play him. But obviously you still have good results against the Chiefs. So your mileage may vary. You can play Josh Jacobs, but you are really just going straight for volume, I think, rather than anything efficiency related. We got Tony Pollard coming up next. Tony Pollard, negative 0.07 EPA per rush. Not surprising to see the lack of efficiency there. Negative 0.07 EPA per pass as well. So he's just a flat, slightly negative guy, but another volume back, 18.7 intended touches per game. And the red zone work has come down meaningfully. 3.6 red zone rushes, 2.1 of which are inside the 10-yard line. 0.7 red zone targets, 0.1 of which are inside the 10-yard line. It's just coming down enough. There was a point earlier this year where we had Tony Pollard getting 7 red zone carries a game. Then it was down to 5. Now we're down to under 4. So we're seeing it go the wrong way, but because of the pass game offense being better, I do think he's a little more efficient and he should see more chances to make efficient runs to the end zone, but he's just not getting kind of run into the line over and over again. And frankly, for running backs, you kind of want them to get run into the line over and over again. I screen save all your stats. My OCD takes over, and I felt like now. Look, you could definitely just grab the data sheet that I'll pop to the comments too. That's probably an easier way to do it. But I'm happy for you guys to get the info however you want to take it and do whatever you want with it. I just, if you want to fade every take I give, follow it until your heart's content. I think you're going to end up wrong more often than not, but we'll find out as we go. Austin Eckler, negative 0.12 EPA per rush, negative 0.16 EPA per pass. He's just not the same dude as last year. Again, another guy, 10% avoided tackle rate. You could not be as small as Austin Eckler and have a 10% avoided tackle rate. And I kind of feel like for Eckler too, like I get the contract stuff. maybe you don't need to do the Yahoo Fantasy Sports podcast. Like maybe you just focus on fucking football and focus on being as good as you were last year. But less opportunity, less good of a player, less good red zone role as well. 3 red zone carries per game, 2.5, which are inside the 10-yard line. So he can get there. But again, the red zone targets are also down a lot. 0.9 red zone targets a game, 0.1 of which are inside the 10-yard line. He's just not as involved. He's just not as good. Everything is worse for Eckler this year. And you could say whatever you want, small back, getting older, contract stuff, teams certainly not as good as they thought they would be. A lot of things to kind of shit on for Eckler, but I just think he's just not the same dude. And I think the effort's not there. And I think you watch him eye test wise and it just doesn't seem like the same player. That said, if Keenan Allen fails on the home stretch, Eckler probably rises a little bit. So that's the main leverage you have, is that if Keenan Allen's chalk, if Keenan Allen's your guy in best ball, or if somebody else's guy in best ball and you have Eckler, I would hope that Eckler can get you there, because I think he's direct leverage on Keenan Allen, but he's just not the guy. He's not the dude. And I think he's going to only get worse from here. So if he goes somewhere else next year and signs a big contract, maybe they'll volume him to get there, but I just would not trust Eckler moving forward. And I definitely wouldn't trust him as a first-round pick next year. I think he's probably a 2-3 turn pick if I had to guess for next year. But we'll see where he goes in free agency if he goes anywhere. Saquon Barkley, worst version of Eckler is what I'd call him. Negative 0.18 EPA per rush, negative 0.18 EPA per pass. So again, a flat negative player overall. 22.8 intended touches per game, again, tied for number 1 overall. And for what it's worth, one of my early season theories is starting to come true. We now have only 5 backs averaging over 20 touches a game, and they're all coming down week to week. So I'm very excited to see if that can happen down the home stretch. But we are now officially in a world where running backs are tight ends, as I warned you about, in May, June, July, August. So that is brings me joy, but probably not great for the running back position. Saquon, though, the red zone work is there. 3.3 red zone carries per game, 0.6 red zone targets per game. It's just the offense sucks. Saquon sucks. He doesn't avoid tackles either. A 12% avoided tackle rate, 18% on pass plays. He's just a guy. He's just a guy. And the sooner you can make peace with the fact that Eckler and Saquon Barkley are just a guy, the better off your lives will be, is what I would say for everybody out there. Isaiah Pacheco comes in at number 9. Pacheco is efficient. Our younger backs are going to be more efficient, and Pacheco's in a good offense as well. 0.01 EPA per rush, 0.14 EPA per pass. Where he struggles is that he just gets 17.5 touches a game. The red zone work is also not as good. 2.7 red zone carries, 1.5 which are inside the 10-yard line. He's not getting deep targets or anything, not that running backs usually do, but like Saquon gets the occasional one. Guys like ATN get the occasional one. So that's something that would be nice to see for Pacheco. McKinnon being out would be a big thing for him. I think that's a big reason why we did see the ceiling game for him last week, because he was playing down to 3rd and longs, was playing some more of the goal line carries or goal line plays rather, that were pass plays. So Pacheco, I think you really do want to see McKinnon kind of go away, but for how he's playing right now, he deserves to be number 9, but I think he could be top 5 if just there wasn't a McKinnon involved. But that's Chiefs ball for you. So what are we going to do? Closing out at number 10, and number 10 is tied with Travis Etienne, as you can see on the screen. But DeAndre Swift, 0.02 EPA per rush, negative 0.2 EPA per pass, 18.2 intended touches per game. He's kind of, to me, just like what the modern average kind of good running back is. He's a part of a good offense. We know that he can sometimes have games where he dominates the offense for sure, but week to week, you're not expecting that. You expect it to be more of Jalen Hurts, and obviously with Swift in particular, I'm actually surprised to see that he's getting 2.5 red zone rushes a game, 1.9 of which inside the 10-yard line per game. Just given how many tush pushes we see, given how much Jalen Hurts takes off the table there. So Swift's role is good, but he and ATN actually look very similar across all the metrics. ATN, negative 0.13 EPA per rush, positive EPA per target, 0.12 EPA per target. So basically, he's the inverse of Swift. We're not as good of a rusher, better pass catcher. He just doesn't get enough pass game work. So those are your top 10 players. I think they're fine, but would you rather have ATN at the end or Swift end of season? Man, that's tough. The parts with the Eagles that worry me is just I just don't see how you run DeAndre Swift full go in week 17 against the Cardinals if you have one loss. So I think that I would probably favor ATN, because the Jags are going to be competitive down the home stretch, because they might not win the AFC South if they don't go full go. So I would say ATN would be my slight lean there, mostly because of the motivation stuff, which is going to matter more as we go. Because again, the Eagles have one loss right now. If the Cowboys don't beat them coming up, they have no threat to even lose the bye, let alone lose the NFC East. So that's something where if you're making those decisions, be aware of team motivations, be aware of playoff odds for these guys. That's what I would try to push you towards a little bit more. Let's keep it going, guys. Other positions to hit on. Let's do QBs, and we'll close it out with tight ends, as we always do, because I get tired by the end of the video, and I don't want to talk anymore. So tight ends are perfect to close it out with. Let me get a sip of water here as well. Appreciate all you guys hanging out for this journey, as always, here. But let's talk about the QBs. Let me go to my QB sheet instead. I I have like different position sheets where I have a QB sheet and then I have one with the running backs, tight ends, and wide receivers. So I'm going back to QBs here. Number one, Jalen Hurts. We know the reasons why at this point. Jalen Hurts, positive EPA per pass, but not great. 0.02 EPA per pass, 0.06 EPA per dropback. Under pressure, he's getting a little bit worse, negative 0.36 EPA per pressure dropback. Still throwing touchdowns at a 6% rate when getting pressured, so that's pretty good. The main thing is there, though, for Jalen Hurts. He's the only QB over 10 rushes a game now. 10.4 rushes per game is where Jalen Hurts is at. And he also throws it deep, 4.1 times per game. So those are both elite level metrics, especially the rushing side of it, though. Rushing matters a lot. I will say, and this is a little bit more of like knowing the data. Again, so, spent the years at Football Outsiders, and I do think picked up some meaningful things there and learned a lot, and some bad, some good. But I would say that for Jalen Hurts, like, you are seeing so many lucky wins this year. You're seeing him really throw himself out of a lot of games. I really think the Eagles are going to run into trouble in the playoffs. Like, I still think the Eagles are a good team, but I just don't think they're the same team as last year. I don't think Jalen Hurts is the same guy without Shane Steichen backing him up. And now we've seen Steichen, provide value to AR, provide value to Gardner Minshew in terms of their growth as players. I think that the Eagles are live for an upset when we get to the playoffs. This might bite me in the ass. I might look stupid. Maybe we'll get the Super Bowl again. But you are seeing so many 2-point wins, 3-point wins, less than a touchdown wins for a team that should be a world beater. So I think he's great in fantasy, but I really think we're kind of running into something with Jalen Hurts that stands out to me. Like, I bet if you ran the Pythagorean wins for Jalen Hurts, where you look at the data, look how close the wins are, I would think the Eagles get less wins that they're having right now. But still, Jalen Hurts is Jalen Hurts, and the workload and the rushing opportunity in particular is better than any QB in football. So that's why he will be number one and should stay number one pretty much in perpetuity. Where the heck is Stroud? Stroud's not here. Stroud, we'll talk about him when we get to that range, but he's outside the top 10, just barely outside. But again, the lack of rushing, and CJ Stroud isn't allowed to throw as many deep balls as some of these other guys. So the metrics do encapsulate the entire year. So Stroud, you're rolling in all the weeks for him where he wasn't getting high volume, wasn't getting there. I love Stroud, but again, the data is the data. We're looking at an entire year performance. We're not trying to pinpoint small sample size stuff. I certainly believe the Texans are going to be a high pass rate team, but they weren't allowing him to throw deep for the first 10 weeks of the year. So you kind of have to look at that for what it is. Josh Allen's in at number 2. No surprises here. Josh Allen going to have to go superhero mode down the home stretch. He's doing, like, this is the part that frustrates me about Josh Allen, because I think people who don't watch the games, the people who just follow the box scores and follow the results, have been really shitting on Josh Allen this year. So in my mind, he's having one of the best years he's ever had. He's at 0.05 EPA per pass, 0.09 EPA per dropback. The stuff that sucks for him is he's not throwing it deep as much. 3.6 deep throws per game, only good for a 0.3 EPA on those. He's running 5.2 times a game, which, excuse me, is more than it was the last few weeks. Still sick from baby stuff. It never goes away here, as all the parents, I'm sure, can attest. 5.2 carries a game, though, is up from where he's been the last few weeks, where he's been hovering around 3-4 all year. To see him run more is a good sign down the home stretch. Again, you're not going to get him for week 13 because of the bye. But I think for week 14, week 15, I would feel really good about Josh Allen's outlay, because the Bills are playing for a playoff spot. Allen is also controlling more of the offense. These are all really positive things that I would say are going to look good for Josh Allen on the home stretch. That said, if the Bills somehow get knocked out of playoff competition, I think they're 8th in the AFC right now. That could be a bad thing for him moving forward. But I would say for right now, I imagine the Bills are going to be full go trying to make the playoffs, and I think they can make it. Definitely as a wild card, you're not going to win the AFC East or anything, I would guess at this point. For Josh Allen, it's all going to come in his hands. So no pause. But that's something for Josh Allen, though, where I think moving forward, if that Eagles game is any inclination of what we're going to see, we might see the best of Josh Allen ever. The risk point is that the more the ball's in his hands, maybe a few more turnovers, but I'd rather have him drop back 50 times a game and have 2 picks a game, because what you're going to get in those other 48 passes are going to be really huge and help you out a lot more. Patrick Mahomes at number 3. Mahomes is just efficient enough and runs just enough that he's never going to fall out, really. 0.03 EPA per pass, 0.08 EPA per dropback. Mahomes is great. It's just the Chiefs configuration is not what it's been in previous years. It's just not as good in terms of the offensive upside. So those are the main things for Mahomes. I still think he can get there, but I also think he's also kind of suffering with the lack of Travis Kelce having ceiling days. We haven't seen a Travis Kelce ceiling day in about 5 weeks now since the last time we saw Taylor Swift at a game, which, sample size getting larger by the week. So for Mahomes, I think he still, deserves the role. He drops back 42 times a game. Like, I get why he's number 3. He's easily the least exciting of the top 3, though, as we've talked about a lot. Like, Mahomes, where he went ADP-wise, it all makes sense. It's just not the same thing as Jalen Hurts, Josh Allen, and even to a lesser extent, to a Lamar, to a Dak even, who went much lower in terms of ADP and best ball. So that's sort of the tough part to look at. Let's see. Dak Prescott coming up next. Dak's dropbacks per game coming up, 37.4 dropbacks. He is also competing right now to be most efficient QB in football. 0.14 EPA per pass, which is higher than everybody besides Brock Purdy. 0.15 EPA per dropback, which is higher besides everybody besides Brock Purdy. So that is where Dak Prescott is. He is firmly a Brock Purdy QB, but with a little more coming through his hands rather than genius coaching, I would say. 4 deep throws per game is looking better for Dak as well. That is on the upswing. He doesn't run enough. You wish he ran more. 3.1 rushes per game, good for a 0.5 EPA. If he ran a Hurts level amount of times and was throwing like this, Dak Prescott would be the best QB in football. And I think he might still be the MVP this year. For Dak's role, though, we know what it is. I think he's still more of a stack QB. But man, like if they just ran him 5 times, let alone 8 times, 10 times, Dak would be really on another plane of existence. He's just not a thing they're going to do, I guess. You have to keep him safe. I get it. But man, Dak could be QB1. He's just not. Justin Herbert coming up next. 0.01 EPA per pass, 0.03 EPA per dropback, negative 0.45 EPA under pressure is the worst of the top QBs we talked about so far. It is better than Lamar Jackson, though, so that's something to point out for Herbert. Lamar at negative 0.6 is going to be the worst out of all the QBs we talk about here, including Jordan Love. Justin Herbert, though, 4.1 deep shots per game, 4.4 rushes per game, so he is running a little bit more and running more than Dak and throwing more than Dak, but less efficient than Dak, so that's why these guys line up where they do in the rankings. Justin Herbert, I do think, so dependent on Keenan Allen. That's really the biggest flaw, is that he can't have outlier days if Keenan Allen doesn't have an outlier day. For Herbert, though, like I think he's a fine play, probably a little bit overdrafted with where he went basketball-wise. I wouldn't write him off down the home stretch. Again, the biggest risk is really that the Chargers pull out of contention completely because they're pretty close to not being in contention enough even for a playoff spot. Lamar, right behind Justin Herbert. Lamar is getting there entirely on the strength of the rushing stuff, I believe. He's now at a negative 0.05 EPA per pass, negative 0.02 EPA per dropback. You don't want to see a negative EPA per dropback for your QB who runs a lot and should be adding a lot of value as a rusher. So for Lamar, I think that is not a great sign. Again, under pressure is the worst of all the top QBs with a negative 0.6 EPA there. Only a 2.7% touchdown rate, and he's taking sacks at a 20% rate. Those are both lows and highs of all the QBs here. So there is a real downside to how Lamar is playing this year. He is running, though, 9.3 times a game, not the most efficient with them at a 0.08 EPA per rush. QB rushes should inherently be a higher EPA play because they're more efficient, but Lamar is not there. It's something, and it might be because I'm watching all the Ravens games and I'm definitely invested in Lamar in best ball. But I really do feel like Lamar is not showing enough here. The case you could make is that he's, I think, due for a little bit of positive regression, but not having Mark Andrews in, I think, is not a great thing. Zay Flowers had the outlier game last time, and we still didn't see Lamar have a good enough game to make a showdown lineup, let alone a main slate lineup. That's my concern for Lamar. I feel like he's still running, but he's like a less aggressive runner. He's also, again, just not that great of a passer still. Just Todd Monken offense where you should be a great passer. Kind of feel like for Lamar, it's just, he could be better. He could be better, and he's not. And I think that's sort of the thing that disappoints me. The alternative for this one would be Jordan Love. Jordan Love should be a lot worse, and yet here he is at number 7. Jordan Love on the year, negative 0.01 EPA per pass, but a 0.01 EPA per dropback. So to put that in context, so Jordan Love, every time he drops back, is adding value in terms of the EPA metric. Lamar, every time he drops back, is taking a little bit away, which is shocking. Like, again, Lamar is the only guy in the top 10 who has a negative EPA per dropback. It's not a great sign for Lamar, and it does perhaps mean some bad things to come. But I guess you could say that kind of the floor games he's had recently might be the bad things that could potentially come. For Jordan Love, though, the pressure stats, as we talked about, again, talk about some of the film watchers out there. QB School with JT O'Sullivan, a great thing to kind of try to wrap your heads around QB play with what you're seeing week to week. Jordan Love looking better according to a lot of those guys under pressure. He's now showing it numerically, a negative 0.44 EPA under pressure. It's actually better than Lamar, better than Justin Herbert, better than Justin Fields, better than CJ Stroud. CJ Stroud struggles under pressure with a negative 0.7 EPA, which is part of why he didn't sneak it to the top 10 here. But Jordan Love running 3.4 times a game, throwing deep 4.5. Jordan Love is rounding in the form at the time. We need him to round into form. So Jordan Love, I think, is live for stacks. I think he's live to make Christian Watson hopefully get a little better on the home stretch, but also you can see spike weeks for Romeo Doubs, can see spike weeks for Jaden Reed, would not shock me. Jordan Love is rounding into the player I hoped he would be this year. So for Jordan Love, I think it's great to see it. Wish we saw it starting with that Denver game about a month ago. But for Jordan Love, this is a really impressive run. I really believe that he is turning it around. And I think the eye test is there. The data is there. Jordan Love is one of the best finds of the year, the best rising players of the year. And I think deserves a little bit more credit. Stroud's impressive. I love Stroud, loved AR, hate Bryce Young. but I think that for a guy popping on the scene, has been in the system for a few years and learning it. Jordan Love is showing it, and I really would have thought he would have learned enough and been there from week one, but we are where we are now, and Jordan Love is back in the mix, and I think the fact that he's above Brock Purdy is shocking, but it's good workload, 37.5 dropbacks a game for Jordan Love, and it could get better. And Christian Watson will save us. I certainly hope so. Brock Purdy, number 8 here. Brock Purdy, we know the metrics at this point, 0.23 EPA per pass, 0.23 EPA per drop back. He's great. The issue is that he's still not dropping back more. Really hoped after the Niners bye that they would go, yeah, let's treat Brock Purdy like Dak. Let's get more aggressive with this offense. They're getting better results in large part because of the defense, but Purdy's still dropping back 30.9 times per game. By comparison, Lamar dropbacks 34 times per game. That's the next lowest out of the group. And a guy like Justin Herbert drops back almost 42 times per game. Patrick Mahomes, 42 times per game. So you're losing 10 opportunities a game for Brock Purdy, which is just not enough to give you the big spike weeks. That said, price point's going to be a little bit lower in DFS, so I get playing Brock Purdy, but he just doesn't have a good enough role, doesn't throw it deep enough, 2.7 deep shots a game, only runs 3 times a game. If they ever cut him loose and just let him get more volume, he is going to be an elite QB, and that's why for playoff best ball, like, Purdy's going to have to drop back more, going to have to do more. Purdy, once again, I think should be a playoff best ball darling, but for what he's getting right now in terms of the outlay, it's not enough for Brock Purdy. Tua at number 9. We know the flaws of Tua, and Tua had a really dog shit game against the Jets, under 10 fantasy points. Few turnovers in that one. On the year, though, still looking mostly good. 0.11 EPA per pass, 0.04 EPA per dropback. Never a good sign to see a QB at a lower EPA per dropback than EPA per pass, because EPA per dropback allows you to get improvisational, to get some runs going, to get some value. But Tua is such a negative rusher that he's not getting there. He also doesn't throw it deep enough, 3.5 deep shots a game, and only 2.5 rushes, which are the worst of any QB. A negative 1.4 EPA per rush for Tua is really bad. Tua's only had like 3 or 4 good weeks this season. Yeah, it's because he doesn't run. I mean, that's it. Like, he's going to do well if Tyreek goes for 200 yards and Waddle goes for 50 and somebody else goes for 50. Like, he can have a nice day then, but he needs to run. Like, if he's going to have like slate breaking upside as a QB, especially this week where he's at an 8K price tag, like, he needs to run a little bit. So if you're playing the Dolphins this week, like, again, against the Commanders, I think it's a valid play, but you need to be like QB +3 in that, because like, he needs outlier days from multiple guys, or he needs Tyreek to go for 70 is basically how it looks for Tua to actually have a good enough day to make it at an 8K salary. Baker Mayfield at number 10, once again, he's getting less efficient, so I think it's possible he falls out next week. Negative 0.04 EPA per pass, negative 0.02 EPA per dropback. So again, another guy, a little more efficient on dropbacks, and it's a bad sign when you see QB. Like, Baker's not the most mobile dude in the world. He does run almost 5 times a game, but like, that's not his primary skill set. You saw it maybe if you watched the game this past week. QB sneak, he gets flattened on a QB sneak and gets almost hurt on that play, or was hurt enough to actually leave the game. So for Baker Mayfield, like, there's some flaws there, but I still think for him, he creates opportunity. He's got logical stack partners. I think he is a QB worth playing sometimes. But he's been the biggest aberration in the SPAGS rankings is that he's been in the top 10 all year. But at least now he's at 10 instead of 5. So that's what we got going for Baker. Just outside the top 10, Kyler Murray, CJ Stroud, Justin Fields, Derek Carr, and Jared Goff. And then behind him is Stafford, Howell. A little bit surprised to see Howell this low, but I think for Howell, he's the equivalent of some of the running backs we talked about, where he's dropping back 47.3 times per game. He's not throwing it deep as much as some of these guys, but still throwing it deep 4 times a game, running 3 times a game. But he's just a negative EPA player. He's not efficient, but the volume is getting him there. So just one thing to keep in mind. Like, I feel like dropbacks a game or per game is not something we talk about a lot with QBs, but it's quietly been a thing that I think is really like the difference between identifying the plays that actually are going to matter week to week and the ones that are not. And Howell has the most dropbacks per game in the league. And like, he's viable in fantasy just entirely because of that, not because of any sort of efficiency, not because of any skill, but that's how it goes. Gamblestein here. Yes, at least he's at 10. Look, again, it's just, that's Baker. You know, Baker's drops back a lot and has had outlier days. That's how it works out. All right, last one to go to here, the tight ends. And I really thought this is the week where we'd finally have to change the Taylor Swift graphic, but nope. Travis Kelce barely hanging on to number 1 here. He is, again, still the best tight end in football. It's just, was he worth the draft picks that you took him at? Probably not. 8.8 intended touches a game, a 0.3 EPA on those. Those are great numbers for this guy. It's just that the red zone work is a little bit lower, 1.4 red zone targets a game, which still number 2 amongst all tight ends, tied with him and Mark Andrews for number 2 overall. Jake Ferguson is number 1 at 1.6 red zone targets a game. But Kelce just not, I mean, he's efficient enough. I really don't know what the issue is with Kelce. Like, it's part of why for me, I'm willing to accept the Taylor Swift part of it more, because he should be having better games and he's just not. Like, every week he's just not. And maybe it's getting older. Maybe it's the fact that they are spreading the ball around and the defense, what we've talked about before with why Mahomes isn't the same outlier player. But I would say for Kelce, like, he's the number one tight end. He deserves to be the number one tight end. I don't think anybody's going to come for this spot now. That Hawkinson's going to have Justin Jefferson coming back in. Andrews is out. Kittle would have to put up like a monster game to make the big jump that he has to catch Kelce here. So Kelce will probably finish the year as number one tight end. But was it worth it? I'd say probably not. I would say in general, for best ball in particular, just trying to get the most of these guys in the top 10. And, for DFS, kind of the same thing. The most of these guys you can get in the top 10, and then really not just taking the number one guy, but it's like, can you get number 1 and number 5 and number 7 as your tight ends? Can you get number 1, number 5, number 9, number 10 as your wide receivers? Like, that should be the way to try to attack it. But for Kelce, he just went so highly that it's like, if you took him, you probably weren't taking many of these other guys. And I don't know, man. And you're also so much opportunity cost for where we took Kelce that if you advance him, I think you're in a good spot. But if you don't advance him, like, it's logical because he just hasn't done enough for you. Hawkinson at number 2, just a less efficient tight end, 0.19 EPA per target. Targets have been great, though. 9 intended touches per game is the highest of any tight end, including higher than Travis Kelce, who again is at 8.8. The red zone work is a little bit worse. Hawkinson's a good player. Like, I have no issue with Hawkinson. I think the issue is really Josh Dobbs. Like, obviously on Monday night, it was all Josh Dobbs, I would say. For Hawkinson, though, getting Jefferson back in is not going to be great for him. I do think that he should fall a little bit, potentially, but he probably holds on the number 2 spot unless Mark Andrews somehow miraculously comes back pretty fast. But it seems like if we get Andrews back, it's week 17 at best, so we don't have to talk much about him. But I really do hope he plays in week 17. That game with Baltimore Miami, if I advance any of that, might be involving with Mark Andrews being my tight end. But I would say for Andrews, like, he's been probably the best tight end in football, 0.46 EPA per target, 6.2 intended touches per game. That does include the game where he got hurt. For Andrews, I think that he would have had a better year if he were healthy and if Lamar were a little bit better. But, that's not the outcome we got. So what are we going to do? George Kittle at number 4, 0.56 EPA per target, most efficient tight end in football right now. The issue is he's only getting 5.6 targets a game, so that puts him in a lower tier overall. Sam Laporta, by comparison, gets 7 targets a game, so you're going to have a better floor with Sam Laporta, but the ceiling for Kittle, I think, is why I would say there's a tier break between number 4 and number 5. Kittle deserves to be in that elite tight end tier in terms of the ceiling, but in terms of the week-to-week production, it might not be that great. Kittle, though, 0.9 red zone targets a game. Again, that's not that great as well. I would say he's closer to Sam Laporta than he probably should be. He's just a lot more efficient. But Laporta is a 0.1 EPA per target guy. Kittle's a 0.56 EPA per target guy. That's the difference between being a tight end who's 10 years out of Iowa versus a tight end who is 1 year out of Iowa. So that's Laporta. I think will get to that Kittle tier in the future. For this year, though, Kittle, we know what the upside is. It's just week to week. Is he going to give you less than 10? Probably. But when he gets to the playoffs, man, Kittle carried my ass through the playoffs last year, even withstanding some big Evan Ingram games. So for Kittle, I would feel really good about having him in your lineups. But he's definitely the lesser version of Hawkinson, Kelce, and Andrews, I would say, by a good margin. Laporta, tier break, but he's a clear lead on this tier break. We talked enough about his numbers here. You guys know the deal with Laporta. Jake Ferguson would be behind Darren Waller, but Darren Waller is on IR. And I really don't think Darren Waller goes again this year, but we'll find out. Ferguson, 0.17 EPA per target, which is not great, but it is better than Sam Laporta. 5.3 intended touches per game. 1.6 red zone targets a game is still best at every tight end, or out of every tight end. But Laporta and, Ferguson rather, is not at 2 a game, which is a pretty big difference. Ferguson, for most of the year, was averaging 2 red zone targets a game. We're seeing that come down as Dallas gets a little bit more target agnostic besides CeeDee Lamb. So for Ferguson, kind of wonder if the best games are behind him. I still think week-to-week upside is there. But if he's like a projection play and the field's going to be there in DFS, I'm probably not trying to go to Ferguson that much just because of the fact that he's coming down, I think is the way that I'd view Ferguson. Dalton Schultz, honestly looking pretty good. 0.25 EPA per target, 5.5 intended touches per game. Dalton Schultz also getting 1.1 red zone targets a game. The issue is that there are so many weapons in Houston. Nico Collins, Tank Dell in particular, taking such a workload away, such opportunity away, and they're so much better than Schultz that it does make it hard for Schultz to get there. That said, in weeks where, again, like Tank Dell seems like he's going to be chalk no matter what his price tag is in DFS. If you don't play Tank, I think you play Nico and Schultz. And I think especially if you're playing Stroud, obviously, but in general, like that's the way to approach it. Schultz will be good leverage down the home stretch, good leverage in best ball. Absolutely. So I think Schultz has a lot of utility moving forward. But in some respects, he might be like the most important tight end out of this group because we know he has the ceiling. We also know the floor is pretty egregious. If Dalton Schultz went on that Evan Ingram, George Kittle hot run that advanced you through the playoffs, it would not shock me, but it would come at the expense, I would think, of Nico, of Tank, or at least one of those guys. So just something to keep in mind with Schultz. He is a very interesting lever, I think, to have down the home stretch. David Njoku getting so many targets because of the backup tight ends in Cleveland. He's also playing 61.5 snaps per game, 7 intended touches per game, which would be very high. Again, we're talking Sam Laporta range. So for Njoku, the role looks great. 1.1 red zone targets a game. We'll see if Joe Flacco comes in. I think that might not be great for Njoku because Flacco still has the arm, can still get it outside. He probably won't check down quite as much, but he might be smart about it and use Njoku the same way that we have seen DTR, PJ Walker use Njoku as like pure safety blankie. He's like their top target because they can't get the ball outside. Again, backup QBs who aren't Joe Flacco and haven't played for years and we know have the deep ball ability. Backup QBs can't get the ball anywhere besides tight end. Like that's how it goes often for those guys. So for Njoku, he's good. I think he deserves to be in the top 10. I don't know that I personally would put him above Cole Kmet and Evan Ingram, but I think he's right there. Cole Kmet at number 9. I think Cole Kmet's best days are a little bit behind him. Tyson Bagent was only looking at Cole Kmet. Justin Fields is clearly looking at DJ Moore, and then he's going to Cole Kmet as a second option. So Kmet can have upside days on the home stretch. It would not shock me at all. But I do think that for Kmet, like I think the Bagent situation was better for him just because it was a better floor and the same ceiling, whereas for Fields, the lower floor and roughly the same ceiling. So that's where Kmet grades out for me. Still have no issue with him. The work is there. Less red zone targets than a lot of these guys at 0.9 per game. But he's still getting enough volume at 5.9 targets a game. And he's efficient at a 0.25 EPA. So Cole Kmet's pretty good, but just not doing enough. All right. And Evan Ingram, number 10 here to close this out, and then we'll talk about the guys who are honorable mentions. Negative 0.03 EPA per target for Evan Ingram, 52 snaps per game, all looks pretty good, 7.5 targets. The red zone work, as we talked about, though, the red zone work has not been there, and it's still not there. He got another target this week, got completely airmailed by Trevor Lawrence over his head, but Evan Ingram is still at just 0.4 targets in the red zone per game. That is lower than everybody who is in the top 10, including Darren Waller, so that's not great for Evan Ingram. I do think that there's positive regression coming in terms of the touchdowns for Evan Ingram just because like you can't be as involved. You can't be getting 7+ targets a game and not score a touchdown. So I think Ingram is going to score a touchdown. And honestly, he might be an important player in basketball in the home stretch because of that. Like he's really due for positive regression. But it also is a different team this year. So maybe you don't see that ceiling that we saw last year in best ball. Ingram, I think a good play, but definitely one that I would say like the lack of touchdown equity, the lack of red zone equity really stands out for Ingram every week. And this is no difference here. Let's see. How can you not like the Goomba in Detroit? A lot of good year two. What? Okay. I know you're talking about Sammy, but I like the Goomba in Detroit. Laporta? Are we calling Laporta Goomba? I like Sam Laporta. It's just he's not as good as George Kittle. That's not a crazy take to have. It's not an indoctrination of Sam Laporta. So we know what the ceiling is for Kittle. And we know the ceiling is for Laporta too. It's just there's enough guys that are taking enough volume away that Laporta, I think, like the ceiling is a little bit more evasive than a guy like Kittle might have it. All right, there we go, guys. Those are the SPAGS rankings. So as I mentioned, I will drop the full SPAGS rankings as a pinned comment down below. So if you want to scroll through and see where your guy ranks, please feel free to do that. Of course, make sure to subscribe down below. I should have had the GIF ready to go, but I'm like fucking congested again. I hate it. But subscribe down below, hit the like button, leave a comment. Splash Play on the march to 3K subs, and we need you to get there. So please subscribe down below. That 46% of the people that watch Splash Play right now aren't subscribed, and that hurts me both personally and professionally in all the ways here. This is a one-person shop here. I'm doing everything I can to keep this channel moving, and we'll always give you guys the best info that I possibly can Monday to Friday every day. So please subscribe down below, hit the like button, leave a comment if you're watching after the fact. And of course, we'll be on Stochastic tomorrow at 11 a.m. So Splash will be at 12 a.m. or 12 p.m. Not 12 a.m. Fucking kill me. 12 p.m. We'll be doing the showdown video tomorrow. Friday, same thing. 12 p.m. We'll be doing the fantasy football gauntlet. That's going to be how it goes here for the next 2 days. And hopefully we'll be back to the 11 a.m. schedule next week if Lofty gets off his maternity leave at Stochastic. Shouts to the Squirt Squad as well. If you can join as well down below by hitting $4.99 a month. You'd support the channel, obviously help us keep putting on the show, but also you get your name here in bright lights. And I'll read them all out on Friday. So shouts to the Squirt Squad. Appreciate all you guys. And go check out Probably. Another good day yesterday, and Probably could have been a little bit better if we'd gotten lucky on some long shot bets that I mixed in, but Probably videos coming out at Probably app. So if you haven't subscribed over there as well, check out at Probly app on YouTube or just search Probly and you should be able to find it, I hope. But we are doing those videos, and I'll be doing the Probly video with the best bets today coming up after this one. So check that out. But you can also go over to Probly and scroll through for yourself for free. You're going to see a lot of negatives Probly Score bets for free. But if you pay for an account there, you can also sort by most profitable and find the best bets right away. No matter what time of day, you don't need to rely on a video. You can check it at 5 o'clock, check it at 6 o'clock. There's going to be new bets that are recently updated based off our APIs. So it's a great product. And honestly, I get more and more confidence more and more. I look at it every day. The back testing that we did last week graded out fantastically as well. So I will encourage you guys once again to check it out because it is a really helpful tool. And honestly, it's worth your money, and I would like your money. So please combine those two together and make it work for yourself. Follow me at Chris Spags. Follow the show at Splash Play Pod. And I'll be back tomorrow, Stochastic, and then this stream right after at 12 o'clock for the showdown. Appreciate all you guys hanging out with me as always. I will see you guys again soon. So enjoy your days and good luck. Bye.